Questions without notice. Are there any questions without notice? Give the call to the honourable member for Flinders.
My question is to the Minister for the Environment. The Prime Minister said yesterday that gas must play a key role in providing peaking and firming power for Australian businesses and households. Does the Minister agree that gas will play a crucial role in providing secure energy supply for Australians? And how many gas projects has the Minister approved since being sworn in?
Give a call to the Minister for the Environment and the Minister for Water.
Well, yes, it will play a crucial role, and I'm not going to comment on individual assessments.
Give a call. Order. Order. The House will come to order. Give a call to the member for Lalor.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Acting Prime Minister.
Order.
How is the Albanese Labor government supporting greater opportunities for Australia through our partnership with India?
Give the call to the Acting Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the member for her question. And tomorrow is going to be a very exciting day as the coin is tossed at the beginning of the fourth test at the largest stadium in the world, the Narendra Modi Stadium in Gujarat. And right now, on the field is a banner which proclaims 75 years of friendship between Australia and India through cricket. And indeed, Australia was the first country with whom India had formal diplomatic relations after independence, and cricket has been at the heart of our relationship since independence. Indeed, months after Indian independence, Australia and India played our first Test match together when India toured Australia in 1947-48. It was the one series that Bradman played against India, and in that first Test in Brisbane he scored 185 not out, and I'm pretty sure that my father was there to watch it. When Prime Ministers Albanese and Modi walk onto the ground tomorrow, there is every chance that they will do so in front of a world record crowd for a Test match. A record which up until now has been held by the MCG and has been since 1960. And cricket is perhaps the best symbol of what we have in common as two countries. You can have an engrossing conversation with a taxi driver in New Delhi about Virat or Tendulkar in a way you can't really have the same conversation even with a taxi driver in New York. Foreign relations is not very different to human relations, and as two countries we are the very best of friends. And right now that matters, because India is becoming a superpower, and India and Australia have greater strategic alignment now than we have at any point. There is an enormous opportunity for us to be trading with India, and a large part of Prime Minister Albanese's delegation to India is as a trade delegation. This is a relationship which matters because we share an ocean, we share a region, and increasingly we are becoming security partners. Last year I had the enormous honour when I visited India of riding aboard a P-8 Indian Navy aircraft, a plane that we operate. This is a really sensitive platform which is engaged in reconnaissance and surveillance, and it says everything about the trust that India has in our country that they would allow an Australian Defence Minister to be aboard. But what transcends our relationship from one of being friends to family is the vibrant and growing Indian diaspora which is in our country today and which will very soon be producing cricketers for our own Test team. Now, as our two countries consider our relationships with China, with the United States, with the region and indeed with the world, we are strikingly similar. And we do live in an era of strategic complexity and threat. But while the way forward is not obvious, some matters are clear. Now is a time to be close to friends. And in the community of nations, India stands in the very top tier of the very best friends that Australia has.
Give the call to the Leader of the Opposition on indulgence.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I want to join with the Acting Prime Minister endorsing his words and wishing the Prime Minister and the delegation every success in what is a crucial opportunity for both of our countries. As the Acting Prime Minister pointed out, we can't say that enough, Richard, of course, as the Prime Minister has pointed out, the relationship between our two countries is certainly based on our mutual respect, on the game of cricket, but so much more than that. When you look at the diaspora community here, the young students who are escaping poverty, who are creating a life here in Australia that couldn't have been imagined a generation ago, 2 generations ago, and the opportunity that they're bringing to their children and their grandchildren, and the role that we play here in that story is a remarkable one. And I want to pay tribute to all Australians of Indian heritage because they are entrepreneurial, they work hard, educate their children, are an integral part of Australian society. And Prime Minister Modi points this out in discussions about the opportunity to export that talent from India into countries like ours. We will be anxious about the first and second day for all of the cricket tragics in this place. We haven't seen too much cricket of day 3 and day 4 in the recent past, but I hope that we can tidy it up in maybe the last session in the second day, but we'll see. But we do wish the Prime Minister every success in this opportunity between our two countries.
Give a call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Government Services, and I refer to the Minister's comments yesterday on Sky News about the attack on franking credits from this government and the attack on franking credits he proposed in the 2019 election. Has the Minister reflected on the difference between his honesty in 2019, which saw him lose an election, and the Prime Minister's dishonesty, which saw him win an election?
Order. I think I know what the Leader of the House is going to say, but I'll give him the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. The question, I'd submit the question's out of order on a number of grounds. Certainly the tag at the end is something that can only be made by a direct resolution, not through the form of a question. And in terms of the policy carriage of the issue, it's not directed to the accurate minister.
Order. I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition. Order. The Minister for Skills. I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, the question relates directly to comments that the Minister made in the media yesterday. The principle is well established. A Minister can be asked questions about comments that he or she has made publicly, and if there's concerns about the last sentence, then the member ought to be given the opportunity to rephrase the question.
I'll hear from the Leader.
Just with respect to the point that the Manager of Opposition Business just made about whether a comment that someone makes can automatically be asked about during question time, the reference in practice to that is specifically when it refers to a previous portfolio, and that's on the basis you can't ask someone about something other than their portfolio. You can only ask about a previous portfolio if they've made a statement on it. To say that if they make a statement on any policy at all, it suddenly becomes open slather in question time would be a brand new precedent that we've never had.
Order. I'm going to allow the Deputy Leader to rephrase the question, and I want her to rephrase the question with respect to standing orders regarding to the Minister's portfolio. So I'll give her another crack to ask the question, and I'm asking her to rephrase the question so it's relation to his portfolio and the administration that he's responsible for. Order. The Minister for Home Affairs is not helping. Give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I refer to the Minister for Government Services' comments yesterday on Sky News about the attack on franking credits from this government and the attack on franking credits he proposed in the 2019 election. Has the Minister reflected more broadly across his portfolio responsibilities on the difference between his honesty in 2019 when he spoke about franking credits, which saw him lose an election, and the Prime Minister's dishonesty, which saw him win an election? A dishonesty that covers every portfolio in this government, Mr Speaker.
Order. Order. Members on my left and right, that question was barely in order, but I'll allow the Minister to respond. order in relation to his responsibilities as a minister. And if he strays too far, he'll be sat down as well. I'll give him the call. Order. Order.
I thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. I did have one prepared about honesty in government in my portfolio. The Royal Commission into Robodebt reflects, I think, one of the low points of honesty by a government. And in our portfolio now we're cleaning up the mess, but one important point which goes to— thanks for the Robodebt question, Susan. One important point which goes towards this question of honesty in government is really this. There have been a lot of witness statements given by a lot of victims of Robodebt in the Royal Commission, and they do make harrowing reading. I'm not sure that the
manager of opposition business. The question was so broad in terms of honesty and the minister's responsibilities. He is in order, but I'll hear from you.
What goes to relevance, it was a question about franking credits and this minister's track record. If he can't answer it, he should sit down.
Resume your seat. And also to reflect about his portfolio, and I'll give him the call. He is in order. You've asked the question. It was very broad. The minister is in order. Order.
The Robodebt Royal Commission is casting a light on matters which haven't been dealt with before the Royal Commission.
Will cease interjecting.
The members opposite, I think, are aware that for 4.5 years there was an unlawful scheme raised, an unlawful scheme. And as much as the members opposite don't like to talk about the Robodebt Royal Commission, part of the reason why we're having the Royal Commission is that for 4.5 years the then government did everything they could to bury the truth. And we've heard in a number of question times— oh my goodness.
The member for Kingsford Smith. I give the call to the manager of opposition business.
Well, Mr Speaker, you've been very clear on your rulings when it comes to the Royal Commission that the minister is not entitled to draw conclusions. He is only entitled to refer specifically to evidence. He's been a serial offender on that. He's offending again, and I ask that you direct him back to your ruling.
Resume your seat. The Leader of the House.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. As the manager of opposition business and the members of the opposition know, the question they've asked goes to all areas of honesty across the portfolio. That's what the question goes to, and so therefore drawing on material about that doesn't have to draw whether or not there'll be a particular conclusion from the Royal Commission. Their question's actually given us a much broader way of asking those questions.
You may resume your seat. We just need to get through this, and I'm going to give the call to the minister. Do not reflect on findings within the Royal Commission. Proceed with your answer.
No.
Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
The Robodebt Royal Commission is necessary because after 4.5 years of breaking the law, the old government never actually explained how it happened. We've had the harrowing statements from witnesses. We've had countless statements from victims. At last count, there were about 400,000 victims of the previous government's illegality. This goes very much to the honesty of services. Now, in the Royal Commission, the evidence has come through and it tells a terrible story. But the reason why we're having the Royal Commission and the reason why members of parliament should listen carefully to some of the stories that we're hearing now is it went on for 4.5 years. Now, I don't think any government's immune from making mistakes. I understand that. But surely we need to have the conversation both on this side of the House and that side of the House. How could you keep breaking the law? And that's not a matter for the Royal Commission. The Commonwealth Solicitor said the scheme was unlawful. That's already a fact. But has anyone on that side stopped to think, how did we keep breaking the law for 4.5 years? Now, I've counted the number of times the coalition minister— how did we keep breaking the law? Now, coalition members may see this as just a partisan issue. But if we don't understand why it happened and how it happened, so far what we've had is a lot of people saying, I don't recall. But I contrast the honesty of the victims who are bravely retelling their stories with the cowardice of the government minister.
Give a call to the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. What has the Albanese Labor government achieved for women since getting elected last May, and what's next on the government's agenda for women?
Give a call to the Minister representing the Minister for Women.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I wish all of the women in this place and across the country a very happy International Women's Day. I know many of us were delighted this morning to be able to join Minister McBain and the Tangney and Lyons families at the unveiling of the Dame Enid Lyons and Dame Dorothy Tangney's statues in the parliamentary precinct. It was a very fitting way to honour them, and we all acknowledge the ongoing work that there is to recognise women across all roles in public life. Of course, International Women's Day provides us with the chance to reflect on the accomplishment of women in our lives and where we're achieving change. This government is really proud to be leading that change. We are proud to be the first majority women's government, federal government in Australia's history. That's a huge achievement. It means that the Australian government is more representative and more diverse than ever before, and that is a result of hard work by Labor to make representation of women in parliaments a priority. In just 9 months of this government, we've already delivered cheaper childcare to help women back into work after they've had children, 10 days paid family and domestic violence leave so that no one has to choose between their safety or their job, the biggest boost to paid parental leave since the scheme was introduced by Labor in 2011, gender-responsive budgeting, and handed down our first budget with nearly a decade that cast a gendered lens over every single spending decision. The National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children, supported by record funding of $1.7 billion. A wage increase for aged care workers where the majority are women. The National Women's Advisory Council to approve Australia's health system for women and girls. Funding and legislation to fully implement the 55 recommendations of Respect at Work. We've opened up consultation on amendments to the Family Law Act to ensure that it is less traumatic for women and children impacted by domestic, family and sexual violence. We've introduced legislation for $10 billion of the Housing Australia Future Fund, with 4,000 properties for women and children fleeing domestic and family violence. And we introduced, of course, legislation to close the gender pay gap, exposing those industries where over 100 or more workers where gender pay gaps are significant. Of course, though, we know that there is a lot more to do. We know that women still experience inequality, they get paid less, we have less superannuation, fewer assets, higher levels of domestic and family violence, greater unpaid work across caring responsibilities, and we hold fewer leadership roles. As women in this place and across the country, we know the job is never done and the job is not yet done.
I'm pleased to... On indulgence, I'll call the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And on indulgence, I'd like to associate the opposition with the remarks of the Minister representing the Minister for Women and note that many of the measures, including the record funding for the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and their Children and record spending on women's safety, were initiated by the previous government. International Women's Day is an opportunity to celebrate the achievements of all the incredible women that contribute so much to Australian society every single day: mothers, carers, professionals, pilots, journalists, teachers, farmers, doctors or small business owners. And it is important today to reflect on the progress we've made as a society towards gender equality in Australia, while we also acknowledge that work needs to still be done. This year's International Women's Day theme, Cracking the Code, highlights the role that bold, transformative ideas and technologies can play in achieving gender equality, Mr Speaker.
Before I call the next speaker, I'm pleased to invite the House that in the gallery today is the Minister for Education and Science from the Parliament of Mongolia, His Excellency Angkam Galan, and His Excellency Mr Wan Chun Kim, the Ambassador for the Republic of Korea. A very warm welcome to you all. I give the call to the Honourable Member for Indi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Under the government's safeguard mechanism, big polluters will seek to offset emissions by purchasing ACCUs from farmland. But farmers say this could lock up productive land and it relies on the availability of credits they need to inset their own emissions for carbon neutrality and avoid hefty tariffs on international markets. How will the safeguard mechanism work if it can't rely on offsets from agriculture?
I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her question and recognise her leadership on matters of climate in the regions and climate in agriculture. And the honourable member asked a number of very important questions. Firstly, in relation to the safeguard mechanism, and there has been a debate across the public sphere in recent days and weeks about the use of offsets, and where the government has proposed such an ambitious scheme to see 4.9% reduction in emissions each and every year. It is appropriate that we provide flexibility to businesses as to how to do that, and offsets are a very important part of that. Offsets are the net in net zero, which all parties are effectively committed to or meant to be committed to. And agricultural offsets play a very important role as well. So, in relation to safeguards mechanism, that is an important degree of flexibility for big industrial emitters. And of course there will be a debate in this parliament when the bill comes forward for a vote, and there will be one in the other House, and when I issue the appropriate regulations. And I've interacted with some members of the crossbench and happy to have further interactions with them about the issues. In relation to insetting and the proposal and the concept that the honourable member refers to, I am aware of that proposal and that concept. National Farmers Federation is interested in it, Farmers for Climate Action are interested in it, and it is a concept which has been consulted on by Climate Active, and it is one of the options available to farmers potentially going forward. I would remind the honourable member and the House of the existence of the Farmers' Carbon Offset Scheme by the government, the $20 million in funding over 4 years to provide farmers and agriculturalists with all the information and best detailed advice that they could possibly access, to give them the choices, informed choices that they can make to ensure that they are maximising their involvement in a way that they choose to. I'm aware of the honourable member's concerns about some misinformation that's common in agricultural areas about some of the benefits of carbon credits as opposed to some of the risks. And farmers should be able to make those choices themselves, but in a fully informed way. And I'm more than happy to engage further with the honourable member about any sensible suggestions she might choose to make in this area.
Call to the member for Holt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government responding to the cost of living pressures facing Australians, and what steps is the government taking to address the inflation challenge that the government has inherited in the economy?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Holt for her question. That is the third question that the member for Holt has asked me since November. That means 3 times more than the Shadow Treasurer has asked me over exactly the same period. So I thank the member for Holt for her question. Even with the big boss away, I can't get a question from the Shadow Treasurer, Mr Speaker. I thought today might have been the day, but alas, today is not the day. Now, Mr Speaker, we know that the interest rate rises which began before the election and continued afterwards are really tightening the screws on household budgets which are already tight enough. And we know that there are global issues at play here, but we also understand and accept that some of the issues in our own economy, particularly in our supply chains, which have been neglected for too long, are also part of the inflation challenge. The Reserve Bank Governor has said something between half and 3/4 of the inflation in our economy are from pressures in our supply chains. And that's why the bills before the parliament, whether it's the National Reconstruction Fund, the Housing Fund, whether it's the safeguard mechanism, all of these are designed to lift the speed limit on the economy, to make our economy more resilient so that it can grow without adding to these inflationary pressures. And that's an important part of our plan. Equally important part of our plan, Mr Speaker, is cost of living relief for Australians who are doing it tough, and providing that in a responsible way, a methodical way, an affordable way, so that we don't add to these inflationary pressures in our economy, whether it's cheaper early childhood education, expanded paid parental leave, cheaper medicines, more affordable housing, getting wages moving again, and the energy bill relief that those opposite voted against. Now, Mr Speaker, we need to provide this cost of living relief like we did in the October budget and like we will in the May budget as well. We need to provide that in the most responsible way, and that means finding room for cost of living relief in a budget which is designed by spending restraint at the same time. And that's why we're so pleased to see that the Reserve Bank Governor, for example, when he was before the parliamentary committees here in this building last month, was talking about how welcome it was that we banked 99% of the upward revision to revenue in the budget over the 2 years where inflation was most acute. Showing restraint in the budget at the same time as we find room to invest in our economic capacity, at the same time as we provide that cost of living relief, these are all equally important parts of our three-point plan to get on top of this inflation challenge in our economy. We expect that inflation has already peaked, but it will be higher than we'd like for longer than we'd like. It is the defining feature of the economy right now. It is the main reason why Australians are feeling such pressure, and that's why it is the highest priority when it comes to our economic policies.
Order. I give the call. Order. Members on my right. The member for Hume will be heard in absolute silence. Give the call to the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Acting Prime Minister. Will the Acting Prime Minister confirm telling the Australian people weeks before the last election, on the 6th of May of 2022, Labor has a plan when it comes to the cost of living? We're going to ease the pressure on power bills. Can the Acting Prime Minister name a single suburb in Australia where power prices have been reduced?
Give the call to the Acting Prime Minister.
Well, when those opposite were given an opportunity to vote on power prices, they voted against it. When those opposite were given the opportunity of supporting the household budgets of this country by supporting the $1.5 billion plan to reduce energy prices in this country, they voted against it.
On my left,
and when the shadow treasurer had an opportunity to be upfront with the Australian people about the increase in power prices under his government, he hid it. That's what they do when it came to power prices.
Member for Fairfax,
now we've made
really
clear that we are focused on cost of living and particularly on reducing the pressure on power
Members
prices.
on my left will
and the
cease
measure
interjecting.
that we put in place in this parliament when we brought the parliament back in December is working. When you look at the forward electricity prices as they were presented in February of this year, they're half of what they were in November. Half. They made a difference, and those opposite voted against it.
Has the Acting Prime Minister concluded his answer? I give the call. Order. I give the member for Dawson resume his seat. I give the call to the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How's the Albanese Labor government giving Australian women more choice by delivering on our commitment to make early childhood education more affordable?
The call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education, Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Macquarie for her question. What a fantastic Labor woman the member for Macquarie is, one who is a passionate advocate for her electorate and her community, and one who I know for whom the affordability of early learning for children is a deeply personal issue, as it is for many women right across Australia, and indeed as it is for me, Mr Speaker. Affordable early learning was absolutely essential for me as a single parent who was working, who was studying, as well as managing my responsibilities as a parent at that time. And without access to the quality early childhood education that my two boys were able to have, and to the educators who did so much for my children, I certainly would not be standing here today. Because put quite simply, Mr Speaker, I would not have had a choice. I would not have had a choice. Now, on this side of the House, we believe that women should have a choice. They should. And that's why, from July 1st this year, around 1.2 million families right across Australia will benefit from our reforms that make early childhood education and care more affordable.
We know that women will be one of the main beneficiaries of our reforms because it's true that the vast majority of primary caregivers are women, and because it's most often the women who have to pause or stop their careers or give up sometimes on their aspirations due to the high costs of early learning. Our reforms give women the opportunity, the choice, to return to the workforce, to take on more hours if they so need and to be able to contribute to the household budget, and importantly also to go back to study if they so wish. This is real and responsible relief to the cost of living pressures facing Australian families. Women like Gemma from Adelaide, who told me that the reforms will give her more choice for her working hours, and she says, "The costs of care were a big factor for me, weighing up how many days a week I would go back to work. It just doesn't make sense to work full-time for less in your pocket. This change will help me work more." And she echoes the sentiments of many women across Australia whom I've spoken to. Now, as we celebrate International Women's Day today, and I wish all women right across Australia and across the world a happy International Women's Day, we do need to remind ourselves that whilst we've come a long way, there is still some way to go. Mr Speaker, I'm proud to be part of a Labor government that recognises this and that has, in the short time that we have been in office, already achieved so much towards women's workforce participation and towards equality for all Australian women.
Give the call to the honourable member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. At a press conference in Homebush on the 29th of April 2022, the Treasurer said, "On every shelf, in every shop, in every suburb, maybe he can name one, is a reminder of the cost of living crisis." This government has an excuse for everything. They want to talk about international comparisons. Australians couldn't give a stuff what inflation is in the United States. Will the Treasurer apologise to families in Western Sydney who have had 9 rate rises under this government, making it even harder for them and their children?
Order. Member O'Connor will cease interjecting before a minister speaks. And so will the member for Barker, who is now warned. Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member for her question. Isn't it interesting, Mr Speaker, when those opposite talk about interest rate rises, they say there's been 9 in a row. They seem to conveniently left off the fact that there's been 10 in a row, and they began before government changed hands in May. That's just the fact of the matter, Mr Speaker. As much as you might try and deny it, that is the fact of the matter. And I also thank the honourable member for reminding the House that the most acute quarter when it came to inflation in our economy was the March quarter of last year, when those opposite were still in office. And as for the comments that I made, then, I think it remains the case. It remains the case that in every part of our economy is a reminder that people are under pressure because the cost of living is unacceptably high. And if the honourable member and those opposite were listening a moment ago, I ran through in some detail the 3 ways that we are looking to address the inflation problem in our economy. And it remains the case, as important as it is that we understand what's happening around the world, it remains the case. It remains the case that the most important thing for Australians, is what's happening to them. I stand by that. It's still the case. And that's why the overwhelming focus of our economic plan, the overwhelming focus of our cabinet, the overwhelming focus of everybody here is the cost of living pressure that people are under. And if you look right across the board at all the economic data that was there in May, what was abundantly clear is that the situation that we inherited from those opposite after a wasted decade of missed opportunities and warped priorities was a difficult situation for Australian families and pensioners. And if they really cared about the cost of living pressures that are on Australian families, they would have voted to help them with their power bills. But they didn't. They didn't do that. And so they had a decade. Mr Speaker, to deal with the issues in our economy. They wasted that decade with their messed-up priorities. We inherited a mess from those opposite. We are doing our best to clean it up on behalf of Australians who are still doing it tough.
Petrie.
Great job.
There's far too much noise in the chamber from my left and from my right. If this continues, a general warning will be issued. I'm looking at the members for Deakin. The members for Barker is already on a warning. The member for Groom. Give the call to the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How will Australian families, and particularly Australian women, benefit from the government's paid parental leave changes which passed Parliament this week?
Give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Werriwa for that question. And on this International Women's Day, recognise her advocacy, her fierce advocacy over many years, not just for women in her electorate but right across Australia. Of course, improving paid parental leave is a critical reform. It's critical for families, it's critical for women, and it's critical for the economy. We know that when done right, paid parental leave can advance gender equality and grow the economy. New modelling from Impact Economics and Policy show that the establishment of paid parental leave scheme under Labor in 2011 resulted in nearly 75,000 more mothers joining the workforce and adding $8.5 billion to our GDP. Paid parental leave is a proud Labor legacy, and the Albanese government is building on this legacy. Paid parental leave reform was the centrepiece of our first budget, where we invested $500 million into a fairer, more flexible and more generous scheme. We know what happens when both parents are not supported to take time off work and care for young children. Usually mums work much less or leave the workforce altogether, while dads remain in full-time work. This pattern persists for years after a child's birth and is a key driver of the gender pay gap. We heard the messages loud and clear at our very successful Jobs and Skills Summit in September, where gender equality and economic growth went hand in hand. Businesses, unions, gender experts and economists all understand that one of the best ways to boost productivity and participation is to provide more choice and more support to families and more opportunity for women. Shared parenting is critical to advance gender equality, and our changes mean from the 1st of July this year it will be much easier for both parents to access paid parental leave and share care. After 10 years of policy stagnation from those opposite, we lagged behind other OECD countries. This government has made investing in paid parental leave a priority, giving more families access to the payment and expanding it to a full 6 months by 2026. A paid parental leave scheme that empowers the full and equal participation of women will be good for business, good for families and good for our economy. Gender equality is at the heart of this government's agenda, and this is just one measure of many that we are delivering to Australian families and Australian women.
And I give the call to the member for Dawson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Assistant Treasurer. Can the minister confirm that farmers holding their farmland or family businesses holding their assets in self-managed super funds could be forced to pay tens of thousands more in taxes under Labor's superannuation changes, due to nothing more than fluctuations in volatile commercial property prices? Isn't this just another unfair new tax on family farms and family businesses?
The call to the Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services.
I thank the honourable member for his question. Of course, Labor created superannuation, and it's a success story. Over $3 trillion of national savings. Australians are now retiring with more money than they ever have before. And the thing that honourable members need to understand is that every single dollar was opposed by those members over there. Every single dollar was opposed by those members over there. In fact, 3 of the last 4 years, they tried to stop Australians getting an increase in their superannuation payments. Now, we've started a conversation in this country about the objectives of superannuation.
Member for Deakin.
We've started a conversation about the objectives of superannuation. It is unusual to have a piece of public policy in operation for 30 years without an agreed understanding of what it's all about. On this side of the House, we understand that superannuation is about providing a retirement income stream. Now, we understand that Australians find that there are lots of taxation incentives for investing their money in superannuation, and that is actually by design. That's by design. We want to encourage people to save for their retirement. But I don't think any reasonable person, perhaps apart from the Leader of the Opposition, could argue that somebody with $100 million in their superannuation account, $100 million in their superannuation account, has their money saved
Assistant Treasurer
for the
will resume his
purpose
seat
of
for a
retirement.
moment. The member for Gippsland is not helping. I want to hear from the Leader of the Nationals.
Speak on relevance. The question goes to farmlands and small business, and the minister has been given a minute and a half to talk about the specifics of this, and he has failed to even touch on that in any way, shape or form, Mr Speaker.
I'm going to ask you, Minister. Order. Well, the member for O'Connor, if you'd like me to rule on the point of order, stop interjecting. The minister was asked a specific question. Draw him back to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The reason we are doing this is we want to ensure that superannuation is operating as it is intended to provide a retirement income stream. Now, the member opposite asked me about self-managed superannuation funds that have illiquid assets in them, like property. It is a requirement under the current law. It is a requirement under the current law that superannuation trustees have provisions within their accounts to account for liquidity events. That is a requirement under the current law. Mr Speaker,
members on my left will cease interjecting immediately, or people will leave the chamber.
The current law requires that superannuation trustees, including the trustees of self-managed superannuation funds, including the trustees of self-managed superannuation funds, have provision within the fund for liquidity. Now, we understand a change such as this is going to represent a challenge for some funds, which is why we are consulting about the implementation of it, and we will ensure that there are transition arrangements. This might be difficult for them over there to understand.
Has concluded. Order. I give the call to the member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. How will the National Reconstruction Fund help Australia to meet key national challenges, including creating new, high-skilled, secure jobs? Why is this important, and what are the risks to these reforms passing parliament?
Give the call to the Minister for Industry and Science. Order.
Thanks, Speaker. And I also want to thank the member for Dunkley for her question. I know she's very proud of manufacturers in her neck of the woods, manufacturers like Clark Masks in Carrum Downs, who are our only manufacturer of portable masks used in emergency services communication. So very important. Please pass on our thanks for their great work. National Reconstruction Fund is all about jobs. It's about creating real paying, secure work in our regions through to remote Australia, jobs in our outer suburbs as well, and including our suburbs like Carrum Downs, I might add. Jobs across the whole supply chain, high-vis jobs, tech jobs and sustainable jobs creation is at its heart. We want Australia to be a country that makes things, and the National Reconstruction Fund is part of that plan. And as a result of the NRF investments, we hope to see jobs emerge across supply chains and value chains, and that will include jobs not just in the production phase, but it will also include jobs in research and development on one end and sales and service at the other, and in between roles in design, logistics, distribution and marketing. And according to a 2020 report from the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre, around half of the jobs in modern manufacturing are in the production phase. So for every 10 jobs we can create on the factory floor, we create 2 in a research job, 4 in logistics and distribution, 2 in after-sales service and so on. So the NRF delivering for jobs across the manufacturing value chain. But I'm asked about risks. And I don't want to say it, but I've got to introduce you to the Demolition Coalition. The wreckers, define opposition purely defined by opposition for its own sake. And the contrast couldn't be clearer, Speaker. We're about building a nation up. They're about knocking stuff down. We're about more made in Australia. They're about more made overseas. We're about more manufacturing jobs onshore. They're happy to see them go offshore. But the only time that the Liberal and National parties are happy to turn the no into a yes on manufacturing is when there's a chance to pretend in front of the media, put on the high vis, strut in front of a mic. It's all lights, camera, cosplay. There they are with the high vis, loving it. But there's a vote coming up, folks. There is a vote coming up, and they can show whether or not they will back Aussie manufacturing and blue-collar jobs. They will be asked to vote for the National Reconstruction Fund, and it will be on the record whether or not they support good blue-collar jobs in Australian manufacturing or not, or go back to their communities and explain why they're against Aussie manufacturing.
Give the call to the member for Wentworth.
My question is for the Treasurer. Australians want their governments to focus on the long term, not the news cycle. They understand we need economic reform because our fiscal arrangements are not sustainable. But past governments, Labor and Liberal, have not delivered the fundamental changes necessary for long-term growth and prosperity. With $1 trillion of debt, high inflation and low productivity, the choices have only gotten harder. So when will we see a real tax and spending reform agenda from this government?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Wentworth for her question and for her interest in all of the areas in her question. It is true that governments are called to deal with the long-term opportunities in our economy at the same time as we deal with some of the nearer-term pressures as well. And if you think about the 2020s as Australia's defining decade and how we set ourselves up for another generation of prosperity like that which was delivered by the reform agendas of the 80s and 90s. We need to be thinking about how do we manage the big shifts when it comes to the energy transition, how do we manage data and digital shifts and the opportunities there, how do we make sure that we've got the workers that we need for the care economy and the services economy, how do we broaden and deepen and diversify our industrial base in ways that so many of the Cabinet Ministers over here are engaged in. And so I think it is crucial right now in the 2020s that we have the capacity to work on that longer-term agenda while we deal with this inflation challenge in our economy. The National Reconstruction Fund is part of our efforts. The Safeguard Mechanism is part of our efforts. The Housing Australia Future Fund, part of our efforts. All of these things which are before the Parliament will help determine whether we succeed in the 2020s and into the 2030s, whether we can reform and change our economy so that we're managing the shifts in the economy but maximising the opportunities that flow from those changes at the same time. And we do need to be able to do that while we deal with this nearer-term inflation challenge in our economy in ways that I outlined in the answer to other questions before. Now, when it comes to tax reform, which I understand was the main feature of the member's question, we are reforming the tax system in modest, methodical but meaningful ways. When it comes to superannuation tax concessions, when it comes to aligning the off-market and on-market treatment of share buybacks, when it comes to multinational tax reform, one of the key things that we discuss with our international partners at the G20 and on other occasions as well. And these tax reforms, these modest, methodical but meaningful changes to our tax system will make our budget more sustainable over time. It will make it more sustainable than it would be without these tax changes. And in addition to that, we do have a whole bunch of other priorities when it comes to our economic plan. fixing our supply chains, lifting the speed limit on the economy so we can grow without adding to inflation. Tax is part of that, but it's not the only part of that. I look forward to working closely with the crossbench, with the member for Wentworth and with anyone who understands that we've got a big opportunity in this country to turn the difficulties of the last few years into immense opportunities for our country and, more importantly, its people. Economic reform is part of that, and we're up for it.
Call to the member for Chisholm.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government ensuring Australia's biggest emitters contribute their fair share of emissions reductions? Why is this important, and are there any threats to progress?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her question. I note that it's the second question the honourable member has asked me this week, which means she's asked me twice as many questions this week than the Shadow Minister for Climate Change and Energy has asked me this year, Mr Speaker. So I thank the honourable member for her interest. And as the honourable member knows, this parliament does have an opportunity in this coming period to implement very important reforms. Welcome back to Australia. Welcome back after your successful movie tour of Japan, Mr Speaker. I recommend these movies to honourable members. Nuclear, what we can learn from Hiroshima, and the sequel. Nuclear, what we can learn from Fukushima, Mr Speaker. They're all-time classics from the honourable member opposite. But, Mr Speaker, the member for Chisholm asked me about the opportunity and the necessity of reducing emissions from our large industrial emitters. And we have the opportunity. If you're going to write a note, you have to do it in Texter. You have to do it in Texter. Nobody can see that. Mr Speaker, we have an opportunity in this parliament to ensure that we reduce emissions from our 215 biggest emitters, and industry and business are crying out for this certainty. This came up this morning at the AFR Business Summit, where business leaders, one after another, called on the opposition to support the passage of this legislation. Tim Reed, the President of the Business Council, said it was disappointing that there was a lack of bipartisan support for the safeguard reforms and indicated that business supports it. Frank Calabria, the CEO of Origin Energy, said, "We think we should get on with it and move forward. We support the safeguard mechanism." And of course, the crediting mechanism, as we have always indicated, was the policy of the previous government we are seeking to continue, Mr Speaker. We are seeking to actually implement it. And it was no on the spur, it was no one-off policy from the previous government, Mr Speaker. In October 2019, the previous government commissioned a review, and then on the 19th of May 2020, that review reported and recommended below the baseline crediting, and the government accepted that. The then minister gave a press conference and said, "It is so important that we introduce below the baseline crediting." And then they issued consultation on the design. Then they took it to the election. And then, of course, recently the member for Hume said they'd already legislated it and it was working, when it was not legislated, Mr Speaker, and clearly was not working because it wasn't the law of the land. We are making it the law of the land. So they've had multiple occasions when they supported this, except when they actually get a chance to vote on it in the parliament, because we've introduced it, something they never got around to doing, Mr Speaker. They've become so negative, they're not only opposed to our policies, they're opposed to their own.
The call to the member for Grey.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Assistant Treasurer. Minister, under the government's super changes, if a family's farm is owned in their super fund and increases in value during the financial year, will they pay tax on that gain even if they have not sold their farm?
Good question.
Give the call to the Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Finance.
I thank the honourable member for the question, and I think we should deal with this in three parts. First, why are we doing this? The reason that we're doing this, we are doing this, Mr Speaker, is this government has inherited $1 trillion worth of debt from those opposite. And simply doing nothing is not an option. We also need to ensure that the superannuation system is operating.
Minister, resume his seat. Minister, resume his seat. I can't hear a word that's being said. Order. And if this noise continues, there will be no warnings. People are ejected immediately. Hope that's clear to everyone. Give the call to the Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We've inherited a debt. We've got to deal with it. We've also got to ensure that the superannuation system operates as it was intended and that there is integrity in the system. And that's what these measures are all about, ensuring there is integrity in the system.
Order.
Now, to the member's question, he may not be aware, but certainly the member for Deakin is aware, and certainly the member of Hume should be aware, that under the current laws, there is a requirement for superannuation funds. No, just be quiet, you might learn something. There is a requirement for superannuation funds, including self-managed superannuation funds, to have provision for liquidity events to ensure that they have a diversified asset base and ensure that they have provisions to draw down. Now, I know that the member for Deakin knows this. I know that the member for Deakin knows this because when he was the minister responsible for the tax office, he had the tax office
Minister
right.
Resume his seat. I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, this was a very clear question. Is the family liable for tax even though they don't sell the farm? If he doesn't know, ask him to sit down and put him out of his misery.
The Leader of the Opposition. Well, if the House will come to order, I can hear what the Minister is saying. I'll remind members again, I can't hear a word that he's saying because of the noise in this chamber. I asked him to return to the question so I can listen to him carefully to make sure he is being relevant. He has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I mean, the Leader of the Opposition's objection underscores the lack of knowledge that he has, and presumably many others, about what the current requirements of the superannuation system. If he did know what the current requirements of the superannuation system were, he would know that currently, under the current law, funds are required to have a diversified asset base.
Order.
So if the only asset in the superannuation fund is one asset, if the only asset in the fund is one asset, as the honourable member describes, they're in breach of the current laws, and they should take that up with their financial advisors. They should raise the issue with their financial advisors. Now, Mr Speaker, as I was explaining, the Leader of the Opposition may not know this, but the member for Deakin was, because when he was the minister responsible for the tax office, he had the tax office write to all of those funds that had only one asset in them and warn them that they had to make provisions for liquidity events. They had to make provision for liquidity events. Now, they may not understand what the current law is, Deputy Speaker, but the member for Deakin does.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. We're moving to the next question. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, this is an incredibly important issue, and I move an extension of time for the Minister to be heard further on this issue.
Order. Motion before the House that the Minister's time be extended. All those opinions say aye. Aye. Against no. The ayes have it. The Minister. Order. 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 Members on my left will cease interjecting immediately. The question before the House was an extension of time. There better be silence so I can hear him, otherwise people will leave. The Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, it's important that the opposition, members who are gathered here, in fact all Australians, understand exactly why the government is introducing these changes, the process that we intend to do to consult with stakeholders to ensure that we get the absolute detail right, and to ensure that we explain to members opposite how it fits in with the current arrangements. The reason we are doing this is that we have inherited a $1 trillion debt.
You are an absolute joke.
You are a joke.
Order. Members on my right. Members on my right. Just the members on my right, members on my left. I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition on point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, on a point of order, on relevance, is the farm, with its unrealised capital gain...
Resume your seat. There's no point of order. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Order. The Minister in continuation.
Perhaps he's been getting some advice.
Order. Members on my right, the member Fremantle.
It is worth noting, Mr Speaker, that they will get anybody but the Shadow Minister to ask me a question. Anybody but the Shadow Minister to ask a question in this House. The reason we are doing this is we've got a debt. The reason we are doing this is to ensure the integrity of the superannuation system. This is a matter that the majority of Australians seem to support, but not the Leader of the Opposition and not the members opposite. It is also the case that under the existing law, the example that the honourable member opposite gave us would be in great difficulty, because that type of asset in the fund, described as the way the member opposite has described it, would be in breach of the existing laws. It would be breach of the existing laws. Members opposite make a lot of noise, but they may not understand the way the existing laws operate. They may not understand the way the existing laws operate.
The Minister's time has concluded. I give the call. Order. Members on my left, when the House comes to order, give the call to the member for Solomon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for International Development and the Pacific. Why is the Pacific Engagement Visa crucial to repairing the damage done to Australia's relationship with the Pacific? What has been the response to the visa, and what are the implications if the visa is not supported?
Give the call to the Minister for Defence Industry and the Minister for International Development and the Pacific.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Solomon for his question and his deep interest in these matters. The truth is, Mr Speaker, our national security is founded in part on being the partner of choice for the Pacific. And the truth is also that there is a great strategic competition occurring in the Pacific, and our standing in that region has been undermined by the last government's incompetence and attitude. We saw the member for Cook's bad treatment of Pacific leaders at PIF meetings. We saw the new opposition leaders joking about Pacific Islands being wiped out by climate change. We saw the former Deputy Prime Minister saying Pacific Islander people should be grateful we let them pick our fruit. And then we saw the then Foreign Minister Payne refusing to visit the Solomon Islands in 2022. In contrast, the Albanese government has been repairing our relationships, has been repairing our standing, and central to that is the Pacific Engagement Visa that builds our people-to-people links with the Pacific, builds our diaspora, deepens our engagement and relationship with the Pacific family. And it complements our increases to ODA, our expansion of the PALM scheme, our increased security ties and our support for Pacific journalism. Now, Mr Speaker, one would think those opposite would have learned after presiding over the Solomon Islands China Security Pact. They would have learned their lesson. But no, they're blocking action on climate change, they're undermining confidence in the PALM, and now they're saying no to the Pacific Engagement Visa. No, they're saying, on the spurious grounds of opposition to the ballot system. In total ignorance that the ballot system has been very successful with the New Zealand scheme and the US Green Card lottery. In total ignorance of the fact that our extensive consultations with the Pacific have said that the ballot system is critical to avoiding brain drain. Only by making the visa random, with strict conditions around health, age, character and a job offer, do you guarantee that a high school graduate has as much chance of winning a visa as a cardiac surgeon? So if you eliminate the ballot, you eliminate that randomness and you actually eliminate any chance of avoiding a brain drain. You in fact deliver a brain drain and you undermine our standing in the Pacific. That would be a bizarre outcome, but that's what they're advocating for. Equally bizarre was their media statement they put out yesterday, where they said they support a permanent visa, but then they said they don't want the people to come here permanently. They also said they want to pick the most skilled people, so we can't use a ballot, but we don't want the Pacific to lose their best people. The truth is, by undermining our position in the Pacific, they're undermining our national security. They're going back to the bad old ways of hurting Australia's national interest and being patsies for the interests of other countries in the region.
Minister's time has concluded. Give the call to the member for Fowler.
My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure. I understand that our current Prime Minister had set up Infrastructure Australia under the previous Labor government. Recently, this authority listed the Metro link between Western Sydney Airport to Parramatta as a priority area. This critical line would have brought job opportunities to my Fowler electorate and reduced congestions. But New South Wales Labor has slashed this line in favour of buses, which don't connect the three major cities. What will you do to restore this critical transport link for my community? Thank you.
I give the call to order to the Minister for Infrastructure.
Thank you very much to the member for her question, and I know that she's doing so as a strong advocate for her community in relation to public transport. I visited Western Sydney International Airport just recently to announce that it's now got its international code, WSI, and it's well and truly progressing well. The Albanese Labor government has committed over $5 billion alongside the New South Wales government to Western Sydney Airport Metro, and in fact I had the opportunity to dig the first sod on that rail line with Minister Elliott not that long ago. It's a very important rail line. It'll be providing important links. We obviously want to see that project to fruition. Of course, there is money that the New South Wales government has put on the table for a business case for part of that line to Parramatta, but no other funding has been committed. No other funding has been committed to that project. We will certainly, as a government who is committed to public transport, committed to the Western Sydney Airport Metro link, we will certainly consider the new government, New South Wales new government, any proposals that they put to us on the table, but no level of government has committed the money to build that project.
Give the call to the member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment and Water. Healthy oceans are central to Australia's economy, culture and lifestyle. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to protect our oceans for the sake of our kids and our grandkids?
Call to the Minister for the Environment and the Minister for Water.
Thank you so much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Corangamite for her question. We've had some great visits to the beaches in her electorate that are really quite beautiful. It's the Labor government's goal to leave a nature-positive Australia, leaving nature better off for our kids and our grandkids, protecting more of what's precious, repairing more of what's damaged, and managing nature better for the future. And while that applies to land, of course, it also applies to our oceans. The oceans in Australia are very close to our heart, and under the previous Labor government we more than doubled marine protected areas, which again were cut by those opposite. We have the most beautiful beaches on earth and an ocean economy that is the envy of the world, supporting recreation, tourism, fishing. More than 85% of us live within 50 kilometres of the shore. And thanks to the strong action of the Albanese Labor government, it's been a great 9 months for Australian oceans. Soon after the election, we committed to protecting 30% of our oceans by 2030. That's a goal that is now supported by the entire world after a big push from Australia at the Nature Conference in Montreal last year. But just a few days ago, we saw another important international agreement with an Australian-backed global treaty to better protect biodiversity on the high seas. This will allow the establishment of marine protected areas in international waters, covering about 60% of the world's oceans. What an incredible advance that is. So, of course, targets and agreements matter, but action matters more. So we've got a plan on this side to more than triple the size of the Macquarie Island Marine Park, adding an area the size of Germany to the highly protected oceans around Macquarie Island. So it's the only place on Earth where royal penguins live and breed. It's where 10% of the world's king penguins mate. It's home to creatures like killer whales, elephant seals, wandering albatross. And of course, while we're massively expanding protections, we'll also allow the existing sustainable fisheries that have been operating there to continue to operate. So in the first 9 months, we've seen a $1.2 billion investment in the Great Barrier Reef, our plan for plastic-free beaches, our support for blue carbon projects for mangroves, salt marshes, seagrass, our new cuttlefish sanctuary right off the coast of Whyalla. We promise to leave nature better for our kids and our grandkids, and that's exactly what we're delivering.
Order. I'll give a call to the Acting Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice board.